This is the Nomad Futurist podcast, a podcast about the evolution of technology, society, and transformation. Connect with us, share your thoughts with us at nomadfuturist.com. Let's get this started. Here are Phil and Nabil. Hello. Welcome to Nomad Futurist. This is your co-host Nabil Mahmood from Kona, Hawaii.
This is your co-host Philip Koblenz from Montclair, New Jersey.
And this is Nancy Novak from Northern Virginia, Fairfax, Virginia, actually, and I'm with Compass Data Centers.
Brilliant. Nancy, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. This has been way overdue, I would say, roughly about 4.5 years.
Right? You're like first person on the list. Who should we interview? Nancy Novak. Just years went by and
Save
never
the best
happened.
for last.
Well, hopefully this is not the last.
No, the best for season 70, whatever season this is of this podcast. But this is a great one. Thanks so much for joining us.
I think it was really actually a push over the dinner in Cannes, and that was actually a phenomenal experience. So glad to have you.
And when I kept asking, like, when am I going to be on your podcast? That was
That's how you know you've made it. Ladies and gentlemen, that's how when Nancy Novak asks, when am I going to be on your podcast? That's how we should just quit. After this one, we should quit because there's no.
Well,
no
that's
better.
what she said, that could be the last
Right.
one.
I think she's right. She might be right.
Yeah. All right. Nancy, so let's get to know you a bit for our audience sake. Could you share at a very high level what you do currently?
So currently, I am Chief Innovation Officer at Compass Data Centers. So I have the best job in the world. I get to take all of my experience and all of the connections and amazing wealth of knowledge I have from all my colleagues and innovate. I get to innovate in a business that I care deeply about, and I get to innovate about things that I am very passionate about. So I'm in a really good spot, and Compass is growing fast, and they're very nimble and very willing to move the needle in very meaningful ways. So that's what I do currently. And I know you'll want more specific, but right now, from a broad perspective, it's a really fun position.
Well, now, how did you get into this place or this position? I mean, was this something growing up as a young lady? Or was that something on your radar to be in the sector, or did this just come about?
I dream of one day being the Chief Innovation Officer of Compass Data Centers. It would be an amazingly specific dream.
My entire life is very serendipitous. It's like just a path that wasn't really planned out, but happened in a very wonderfully serendipitous way. But my dad, my wonderful dad, who I lost about 1.5 years ago, was the general superintendent for one of the largest construction firms in the world, I think the largest at the time. And so we would always go to job sites with him in the summer times and fell in love with the business, got really kind of good at being in that environment and feeling at home there. So, and there weren't a lot of women, still aren't, in the construction industry, but that's how I got to start out. Like, I did one job with my dad at a lovely spot called Fort Irwin, California, which we coined as the armpit on the way to Las Vegas because, it's out in the middle of nowhere.
You're speaking to someone in New Jersey, so I know everything there is to know about the armpits of America.
Yeah, well, Fort Irwin's one of those charmers, and we call it the garden spot of the high desert. But it was a huge education for me. Again, just kind of fell in love with the people in the industry. I loved the cross-section of humanity you got to be with, from the individual skilled trades all the way up to the architects, engineers, owners, and all of the folks who were in the built environment. So back then, there was no data center. For goodness sake, I don't even think there were computer rooms back then.
What was it? What were you building? Was it commercial real estate? Was it offices?
I did a lot of military to begin with. So I did a lot of military work, and this particular project was a large barracks complex. So it had a central energy plant, it had barracks, it had ammunition bunkers, it had a dining hall for the Army. So I started out my career for about the first 8 to 10 years of just doing a lot of the military work, which I think was great training for me because they definitely have all the bells and whistles when it comes to what they need and want from a construction project. So anything else you do is kind of like, it's easy after that. Even though I've always kind of used that as a guideline for how to set something up for success. Because I've been very, very fortunate and gotten to build some of the coolest shit from coast to coast here. And so that's why I love the industry. I was a job chaser. I would chase jobs, I'd be like, I want to do a hospital. I want to do airport. And I did a launch pad for Lockheed, which was like super fun. And then I did the Pentagon, and I had the Pentagon before the plane hit. So I experienced that whole thing. And
oh my God.
Yeah, some museums for Smithsonian, who was a wonderful client, by the way. So just really got a big cross section about learning for every industry I got to build for. But as I was saying, there were no data centers back then. And in fact, there was not even a computer on the job site. And so I always joke about the fact that when I got my degree in construction management, which was a very new degree back in the day, I minored in construction technology. And construction technology had nothing to do with the computer.
Right.
It was literally, why does concrete heat up and why do you need camber and steel? I mean, it was like that kind of engineering and technology. And now it's like construction technology. Nobody would think about that. They think software. So
right, building management systems, et cetera. While you're at Hensel Phelps, this is the Hensel Phelps.
yeah, they were my biggest experience from a general contracting standpoint. Right.
And did you grow up in California? Is that where?
That's where I got my degree, was in California. I started out in Minnesota, spent quite a few years of my youth in Arizona, and then high school through adulthood was Southern California.
And that travels because of your father and the family, I'm assuming.
Exactly. Yep.
Wonderful.
Everyone would ask we're in the military, and I'm like, no, we're in construction. It's very similar.
Right, but it's also like you're constructing for the military, right? So you kind
That's
of
true.
you're kind of there. You're following them around.
So what would you say the best part of working with the military was? Was it discipline? Was it process driven? Was there anything in particular that stood out for you that helped you down later in your career?
A lot of it, I mean, the process driven part was good. And I also think that kind of like, because they have such a large portfolio, they had to raise the bar on what their expectations were. So whenever you start out a project, when you're trying to manage certain risks, you want the setup to be where all the effort is so that the rest of it runs smoothly. And the military projects kind of set you up for that kind of success. Because like I said, when you're working with other private owners, they don't necessarily look for the gold-plated requirement. So it just makes everything else a little bit easier. And I also like the fact that they have rules, they follow the rules, they don't throw the rules in the trash, they comply with them. And once you learn the rules, then everybody can get along pretty well. So there's not as much guesswork, or I would say it's not as siloed, which can be a struggle on a project, right?
So during that tenure, if you were to pick one project and that basically changed your interest or exposed you to the mission critical space, what would that be? Or something that you talk
this
about
is a
openly?
good one. That's a very good. So yeah, I'll tell you the story about how I got in with Chris Crosby, but I do want to point out the connection you're trying to make here. And that is like, honest to goodness. So doing the launch pad, which was done back in the early, the maiden voyage was 01. So it was late 90s, early 2000s, was really what got me interested in the digital world. Because at the time, the space shuttle program that had been retired was all done we didn't have digital technology, right? So we were fascinated by this, and we got to do really cool stuff. And what I loved about that client, who was the Air Force, basically Lockheed and Boeing, is they were very interested in their mission. They were very mission driven. They were not petty in any way. They taught me a lot about motivation and risk when it came to contracting. I love the fact that they were very keen about engaging us in the language that we would be having to comply with so that everybody's behavior was a certain way. On that particular project, I converted all of our major subcontractors to an open book arrangement. So we would have, because it was very dynamic. They didn't even have the vehicle they wanted to use to launch. And now it's the most successful unmanned vehicle ever in the history of space launching. So I think it's pretty cool. And I got to learn a lot. And here's how it connects to mission critical, not just the digital technology from analog, but also the fact that, think about it right now, with Edge and the 3 billion people on the planet that still need connectivity, space and satellites and Starlink and things like that are what's going to really help us close this gap on the digital divide, right? So it really does kind of tie together. And I love also to think about how every client I've ever built for has to store data, use data, apply data, access data, all of the things about data and how it's an evolution of humans, right? And how we communicate and transact. And so it really does all tie together, and it brings me right into that mission critical space. But I do have a very serendipitous story about how I actually got connected with Chris Crosby, if you're interested.
Absolutely.
Let's yada yada.
Yeah,
We're interested. What, are you kidding me?
exactly. Yeah, because the next question would be, with the launch pad, why did you choose Chris Crosby versus Elon Musk?
Right.
Oh, true. It's actually an amazing question, because the head of Elon Musk construction program used to work for me at the Pentagon. So he's a great guy. And I've reached out to him a few times to get some funny stories about his boss. But no, the way it worked was I had retired for a bit. I retired for about 3.5 years when I was in my late 40s. And mainly because I'd hit some goals and I wanted to see if there was something else I could do besides continue to run work and build things. And so I retired and I started to attend like really amazing conferences, like the Women in the Economy for Wall Street Journal, the Fortune Media Most Powerful Women conferences, things like this, right? And I started to learn. I was trying to learn. Like I struggled with the whole lack of diversity, and I was really trying to learn what is it? Because I just blamed our industry. Like it's just too hard. Not that women don't like to do hard, but I was like, oh, it's too hard in the industry. I don't get it. And I started seeing these common threads, and I started meeting people. I traveled around the world and met a lot of fascinating people that were outside of my industry, but related back to the struggles I was having. And I started to empower myself with some more firsthand knowledge about not just, oh, I can just blame my industry, but basically say, how can we change our industry, start attracting more diversity, which we desperately need? So by doing this, I was able to, like I said, really spread a wide net. And during that time, I got called back in a few times with Hensel my old company, to help them with some large procurement. One of them was the Apple headquarters pursuit in Cupertino. And we actually tri-ventured with a couple of other companies. And one of those companies was Balfour Beatty. So I got to meet their leadership, and the job was not awarded to us. And I still thank my lucky stars that that's the case. But at the time, the general superintendent, which was a huge compliment for me, said, I don't want to do this unless Nancy comes back in. And I really respected him a lot. But I said, it's interesting because the Pentagon can fit in the center courtyard of that headquarters. And Norman Foster was the designer, and I had worked with him with Smithsonian in the past. So it was kind of like this interesting connection. But nonetheless, we didn't get it. And then a year later, I was skiing in Steamboat with my daughter for spring break, and I ran into Balfour's chief of enterprise, and he said, what are you doing? And when are you going back to work? And I said, yeah, it's probably time for me to go back to work, but I really don't want to run work, because if I run work, it takes everything out of me, right? And I want to use my knowledge and my experience to be in the industry, but be able to continue to speak and learn and, innovate basically, and work on the things I'm passionate about. And he said, that's perfect. We know your history, and we are trying to unify our company where we have acquired quite a few different firms in different regions, and we want to make them standard. And then you can go ahead and speak. And so that's how I got in with that. Well, one of the national accounts was Chris Crosby at the time, and it was Compass Data Centers. And so we just got to know each other on a couple of jobs, and he had a very unique approach, like as everybody knows. And so I really liked it. And then about 3 years later, when I had done what I wanted to do there, I again announced retirement. And it only took about a day, I think, maybe 2 days, for Chris to call me up and say, hey, would you mind coming down to Texas to see what we've got going on and help me build this? And it was fascinating because I was like, at first, my first impression, and this is important to make at this point. So data centers, when they started being built, I built some of the first Equinix ones in Ashburn, right? And when they started being built, it was, to me, it was like the labor is expendable, because they would just run them 24/7 around the clock. And it was kind of cracking the whip. I want everything yesterday. And I felt it was very disrespectful to the trades. And I was like, not happy about that. These are just big, at the time, the colos, right? Just big boxes with lots of power and air. So, not the same as like a launch pad or a museum or airport, but still critical. And I was like, I don't know. I'm not sure this industry is right for me, because I don't like that part of it. And Chris said, you got to come and see what I have going on. I'm completely changing the game here. And I went down to Texas and I saw what he'd been working on, and the appeal of doing the wash, rinse, repeat and continuous improvement that really put the holistic lens on about total cost of ownership, looking at the skilled trade, looking at your resources, partnering with people, taking down silos. The ways that he was looking at improving the industry got me excited, because it wasn't just about doing things better in the digital infrastructure. It was, in my mind, and I told this to Noelle when I was speaking with her in Cannes, France. In my mind, this was a way to change the construction industry as a whole, right? Because the opportunity with the demand in this fifth industrial revolution that we're tip of the spear on is massive. So that's what got me so excited, and obviously wanted to come help Chris do that.
Just when you thought they were out, just when you thought you were out, they pulled you back in.
Not once, but twice.
Right? Twice. Let me retire. No, there's more innovating to do. What strikes me is looking back on it, there's no doubt it sounds serendipitous, and it's like one thing led to another, and you just have this arc that is, you're now on behalf of Compass, but it sounds like there's been this kind of Nancy Novak innovation role that you've had this entire time, where your approach to these construction projects has been informed by some kind of 30,000-foot view of how they all work. Did you always have that? Is that something that you've a unique way of looking at things, right? People tend to look only at what's in front of them and not less at the kind of larger landscape.
You're kind of describing diversity, just to be honest, because like, and it is true. Like I've been told it's like the crystal ball, but it's really not the crystal ball. It's just a different perspective, which is why we love diversity of all forms, right? But I do think that I've always had a very strategic outlook on how I want things to work out. And mostly it's like, I mean, I think about when I was raising my kids and I'm like, every single day I'd wake them up and I would say, what's your job? What's your job today? And they would say, to have fun. And I'm like, yes, that's your job. Because when you become an adult, you forget how to do that. And if you're having fun every day, then you're doing something right. And so in our industry with a lot of risk and a lot of, it struggles and just I look at the skilled trades and I see, the mental illness and health problems that they have. And I think it's a shame and we need to have more fun and we need to do it in a very responsible way. So that was always kind of my goal, was to try to live every day and do what I like doing, but not do it like I'm in the trenches all the time. Right. So yeah, but I would say that strategically, I like having the holistic view. And I got to tell you, it's funny because you know how we have lots of different conferences that we attend. Every so often, one of the conference producers will call up a handful of people and say, hey, what could we do differently? And what do you want to talk about next year? And that type of thing. And that happened to me last year. And I think I was like the last one they called. And they literally ended the call. And they're like, we should have called you first. Because you just have a different perspective. I said, here's the things you guys aren't talking about, right? You talk about the same stuff in every conference. And I'm not saying that it doesn't get progressive when it comes to like AI and new engineering and technology to go with that. But some of that holistic viewpoint of changing the industry for the better and understanding the built environment and how it's related to the digital infrastructure, right? And that's what I thought was fascinating in the beginning of my digital career here. I was usually the only one who was a builder in any panel or in any conference. It was always about kind of the operation side, the design side. And I'm like, we need to bring the build side into it, right? So that's been fun.
Very good. So you talk about diversity a bit. I feel brought forward diversity of thought, diversity of expression. Looking back and just stepping back in time for a bit, do you think we've made maybe a bit of progression to address the diversity, equity, inclusion gaps that we have had for decades and decades? Are we heading in the right direction?
I think the awareness is much, much better than it used to be. And I think that the acceptance or the understanding of the value in that has improved greatly. So I think that's huge. I think there's still lots to learn and there's plenty of room to improve. And you're talking about two different, you can look at the tech industry, they're doing a little better than the construction industry is. Construction's pretty dismal still. I think right now, from a gender's perspective, we're still right at that 10 to 12% of women, that's in the entire industry. And then when you get up into the executive ranks, that drops down to 1% or less. So still like obviously a lot of work to do there. But again, the awareness is there. I've seen change since I've been in the industry clearly. And I think one of the challenges is the implicit part where every single human has implicit biases because our brains are very limited. We only know what we've been taught and what we've experienced. We know nothing more than that, right? So having implicit biases is human, but understanding you have them is just education, right? So being able to check those and then work with that is going to change things. And that's some of the things that we like to talk about because there's lots of great tools on how to do that.
I think it's an incredible point that we try to make over and over again, right? That I think the diversity and inclusion in general has, that you tend to, in other industries, be a lot of box checking, diversity of gender, diversity of ethnicity, diversity of religion, but diversity of lived experience, diversity across socioeconomic lines, especially in our industry, it's touching every corner of the planet, right? There's nobody that doesn't have some level of use for the stuff that lives in the stuff that you're constructing. So inevitably, to innovate to make it evolve along with the way these various regions are evolving as we start seeing massive data center construction in Africa and a lot of these other areas that have not seen the type of development that Loudoun County has seen and some of the more popular places. You need to get that boot on the ground perspective from those groups, just from beyond it being right. It's really the only way for us to continue to grow. You can't like outsource a group of people to go into different communities and say, we're going to build this windowless building and it's going to be good. Just trust us. Trust us. We're going to suck up all your power and all your water, but we'll do it as responsibly as possible. Just take our word for it.
Well, yeah, and a newsflash, like one of the last things AI will be able to take over is the skilled tradesperson, right? Not to say that we don't have modern methods of using robotics in manufactured environments, but right now to put work in place in the field, it's really the skilled trades. And we are desperately short of them. But you're totally right. I mean, it's like diversity of experience is probably the number one thing that we're looking for, because it does provide all those different perspectives. It gives you that 30,000 foot strategic view from a lot of different perspectives. And that's what drives innovation, which drives problem solving, which drives profits. And that's really where the business case is. And that's what I think is an improvement, is that we are more aware and believe in and understand the business case. I used to say, they have these studies that say, oh, if there's a woman on a board, then the companies are 20% more profitable. And so they have this data point, right? And it was just like, look at all these companies have a woman on the board and they're more profitable. And there's no proof that that's the correlation. It's just a fact, right? And it's like one of those interesting things where you're like, is there better empirical data that says if we just have a more diverse perspective, because we're not all thinking the same and experiencing life in the same way, can we be more innovative and can we solve more problems? And I think now it's more acceptable that is absolutely the case.
Right. And it's also like you have to look into it. You have so many companies and industries that try to focus on quarter over quarter or year over year, but you really have to play the long game if you're going to build a culture that is accepting of different perspectives and not just, how do I make my numbers this quarter or this week or this month or year so that I can keep my investors at bay.
Excellent point. That's an excellent point. And that's a very true point, because the short-sightedness of having to do that because of your own personal gain, which is also driving a lot of the behavior, really limits us a great deal. So very good point.
So how, in your opinion and your experience traveling around the world, what do you think is the easiest and the quickest way to address this?
So I have this moonshot that I would love to someday see happen in my lifetime. And it has to do with what I call spontaneous awareness. And so it's interesting, Nabil, because like the tech world and the digital infrastructure and the data center industry is still fairly new. The cloud's 15 years old, maybe. It's still fairly new.
If not, yeah.
Yeah. The construction industry is old as dirt. I mean, it's older than one has a really bad reputation and we can't hardly attract people into it. The other one is kind of like this mystery that we're still trying to figure out, right? And now they've merged. Now they're coming together, right? So my moonshot is I would like to get more spontaneous awareness around, number one, the fact that construction is STEM, because I've literally talked to people on the Hill about STEM, and then they go, oh, yeah, I guess construction does have science, technology, engineering, and math in it. That's fascinating, because people think lab coats or computer programmers, they don't think builders and architects and engineers and so forth. But then, and the other thing is I would like for us to be able to partner with large advertisers, because right now there's so much data out there that it gets saturated and everything feels like a grassroots effort, right? So I like to say spontaneous awareness is when you say things like, when you say the bucket challenge for ALS, everybody knows what that was because it kind of went viral, right? If you say throw like a girl, that was that Procter & Gamble commercial that everybody remembers that really kind of highlighted how people,
that also got them into trouble as well.
It probably did, but it's spontaneous awareness. Like, what I mean. When I say yellow ribbon, you understand what that is, right? So whether it's a symbol or a song or an advertisement or a challenge of some sort, if we could get more spontaneous awareness about the things that we need to solve for in our industry, I think it would definitely help us from an awareness standpoint, and it wouldn't be just buried in all the other things that are happening. And so I have a story. I don't know if you guys want to hear it, but it's about the chief branding officer at Procter & Gamble who sits on a board with me. And
we definitely want to hear it.
So I sit on quite a few different boards, and this particular one I met again in a serendipitous way. But It's the World Trade Center Institute, and they're a great board, and they have a global reach. And I'm always fascinated because they talk about things that I would never think about if I stayed in my own lane. Anyway, one of the conferences that I sponsor every year is called Women Spanning the Globe, and women come from all over the globe. So the first time I'd gone to this conference, I saw Mark Pritchard, who's Procter & Gamble's chief branding officer, speak, and he was talking about how they partner with the Olympics, and because he was just basically, we're doing, this is a lessons learned sharing kind of thing. And it was great. I don't know if you guys remember the Thank You Mom commercials in the Olympics, but it's like, it had me crying. I have 3 kids, and I'm like, oh, and I was sitting with a group of his people from P&G, and I was like, these are great commercials. I said, but I feel left out. I feel like I have to choose between having a career or having an Olympic athlete because there are no working moms represented in these commercials. And they said, you should say something, Nancy. And I said, well, I don't think I know enough to be able to stand up and speak about this. So the next year, the same thing happened. He's doing a similar presentation. And I decided to be brave because now I've gone to my other conferences. I've armed myself with some knowledge. And I said, hey, Mark, I love these commercials, but this is the way I feel about it. It's kind of restrictive on one individual. I mean, the Olympic athletes are great. I said, but I think there's no working moms and you can represent more of the real society. And he was getting ready to address that. And before he could, the ambassador of Sweden was at the conference. And she said, I don't see any dads in that commercial either. And in Sweden, we're very big on the parity and parenting. And I don't think that would fly very well in Sweden. And then he turns over to say something to her. And then before she could finish, or he could finish with her, Michael Phelps' mom stands up because she's there at the conference in Baltimore. And she's like, Mark, I've been a working mom my son's entire career, and I'm not represented in your commercial either. And my son's won more gold medals than anyone at the time, I think. And it was great because he basically said, we're working on a We See You Equal campaign, and we understand and we hear you because we know they're the largest advertiser in the world, and it's powerful what they do. And people do get spontaneous awareness, and they normalize what they see and hear and digest in this form of media, right? It's what we consider acceptable, unacceptable, normal, not normal, those types of things. So we can try to get our industry to partner with someone like that, or have some kind of a rallying point or a catalyst that says, we're not what you think we are. And
I'm thinking, I'm in my head, I'm thinking on the East Coast, I don't know if this is true all over the country, but certainly on the East Coast, we have this hugely annoying commercial for Cars for Kids. There's a jingle, 1877 Cars for Kids. And it's just, my kids know it. Everybody knows this Cars for Kids commercial. Like, you know exactly what you're going to do. As soon as you don't have to hear the words. So we need a jingle. We need to come up with a jingle.
The jingle, I think that's a great idea.
Right.
That's what they do back in the mid-century all the time, right?
Exactly. We need a jingle. That could, and Nomad Futurist, I think, is who should be tasked with finding our jingle, so everyone knows. Oh my God, the ice cream man is here. The ice cream man jingle by heart. My kids know if they're asleep and they hear na 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 na, and they know ice cream. They're up. So we need that
spontaneous awareness right there.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you think that also comes with a part of challenge as well? I mean, not to play devil's advocate over here, but if you don't have, as a sector, our narrative right of what we are doing. I mean, we've been actually the best kept secret for the last 4 decades of computing, and we don't have our narrative right. Don't you think that we actually need to work our narrative first before we actually go with these spontaneous movements?
Well, I would hope that if we were having if the spontaneous awareness is about just the fact that there is this industry, right? And that you should look into it. And I don't know that it would be a movement that would enable someone to make a decision right away about the industry. But like that whole catalyst I was talking about, a few years back, I was working on another initiative on a board to build a National History Museum for Women's History, which Smithsonian's work is doing now, which is great, right? And I was like, again, there's a rallying point where you could get some of our clients, you could get our industry to say, hey, we're going to do a physical structure made with scientific, neural, engineering, math, and it's going to be this repository of women's history and blah, blah, blah. It'd be awesome if we could rally around that and then use the time up until the time they get it built to kind of have this learning experience for people and bring about awareness over the industry and not just the history of women, right? So and I feel like we miss opportunities like that. Who doesn't love Smithsonian? We all love Smithsonian, right? Who would want to participate in something like that? And that's just another idea. But my point is, like, there's got to be an idea that allows us to at least have someone go, I should look at that.
I think part of it, and it's something we are trying to do actively as part of the foundation by bringing like the disparate voices. I mean, all of the companies that are like big in the digital infrastructure space are almost intentionally hidden, right? Because when they're visible, they are down, right? It's an outage, right? You don't want to be visible because everyone takes for
the surface
granted.
whale gets harpooned kind of a
Right.
thing.
So in our industry, who are the big names? I'll even include Compass, right? So you say, if you say, oh, my servers are with Equinix, right? They're like, oh, why is your server in a gym? Because that is what people think of, right? If I said like, oh, I'm using Compass for my server, aren't they a real estate company? So it's just what we need to do is there is no like data center consortium where we
Right.
all come together and we collectively build awareness. It's something that we are trying to do, obviously, with high schools and making it a viable career path to try to get new people into our industry with diversity of thought, with diversity of socioeconomic experience. But realistically, before we even get there, we need their parents, their grandparents, their teachers, the people that run the communities to actually understand that it's not just magic that all this stuff works. That, Bill Clayman, before the last DCD, like 6 months before, saw a bunch of people picketing outside of a data center construction happening in Virginia, and then brilliantly went over and engaged with them, like what's the issue, and then had like a DCD panel in Northern Virginia, probably the best single panel that has some level of controversy, some level of nuanced thought with people outside of our industry discussing like what their thoughts are about construction in our industry. And it was fascinating. And you go up to people that are organizing, like, how did you organize? Oh, well, I reached out to them in a WhatsApp group or Facebook. And the idea that their ability to picket is enabled by the very data center that they are picking.
Yeah. I always say that they complain when they're using iPhone. Yeah, but I agree with you on that. I think that awareness, and trust me, this podcast is on the right path. But it's really what you're asking is, how do we go big or go home? And how do we really impact and move the needle faster? Because this is the right path.
Our 15 listeners are probably not it. We need a couple more. We need a couple more.
Millions of people.
The millions.
Yeah.
Easily.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the next McGregor. All right, let's go back in time just for a bit. So as a young girl going to school, what did you want to do when you grew up, besides your father's influence of getting into the construction space? Was there anything else that you were exploring or looking into?
Not really. I mean, I was always really good in math, so I figured I would do something that had to do with engineering. And honestly, the reason I say that is my dad had all girls. He was a Marine Corps sergeant. He played semi-pro football, and he was a general superintendent for the largest company in the world. And, we were brought up in sporting, fishing, and hunting, and going to job sites, and it was just, for me, it felt like home. I was way more at home there than in most any other environment. And so I love being on job sites. I love the feeling that it feels like home to me. I enjoy talking to the tradespeople. They've always been kind of part of our family. So I think I was always kind of on this path. And I did wonder, like, from a management level or executive level, how I would get where I was going to go, because it wasn't easy. Although that's a whole nother podcast to talk about. But it was really my dad who set the bar. It was my mom's tenacity, but it was my dad, kind of setting the bar of expectations. But I've had people ask me in my career, how is it that you just have a different approach when it comes to like conflict and things like that? And I was like, I think it was normalized for me because with my dad on the job site, he just wouldn't put up with shit. And so I was like, oh, I guess that's how it's supposed to be. I just didn't have to put up with things, and I should be able to speak out about that, right?
Yeah.
It was, for me, it was just how I was brought up. And
He puts up with shit at home. How come he doesn't put up with shit at the job site? It's so weird.
right?
How about
You
your
had
siblings?
you had sisters. You had sisters. Exactly. I think me and the Beal were almost like doublemint twins. We were always asked the exact same thing. Did your sisters also follow a similar path?
One of my sisters teaches kindergarten. She's probably the most brilliant kindergarten teacher in the world. The other one is a phlebotomist, so she's really good at taking blood out of people. And my twin sister is in the industry. She has her own general contractor's license. And
There's another Nancy Novak. Oh my
well,
God. How do we know which one we're talking to?
not identical. She's way more artistic than me, and she has a services contract. She did a lot of work in the Middle East, and she does custom homes. She's more high end, but she's definitely in the digital environment when it comes to providing, but more specifically, CM services, but focused on gender. So she did go into the industry, just a whole different part of it than I did.
So one of the things that we've actually experienced over 4.5 years or 5 years almost going on doing this is the fact that, and I've really become a firm believer of it, it all comes down to exposure, exposure, exposure. So it's sort of like muscle memory. If you learn how to swim at an early age, you can pick up swimming anytime. If you get on a bicycle early age, you can get on a bike anytime. What's your opinion around that, to expose the younger generation to our sector at an early age, whereby we believe that they would end up becoming good global digital citizens and potentially understand of what happens behind the scenes, so they're not governed
Maybe not freak out when the
or
damn internet
freak
goes
out
out.
by-
I mean,
exactly.
my God.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, so I think, it's been proven over and over that the repeating the message is what gets people to catch on to it and to be able to repeat it themselves, right? So whether it's following directions or memorizing numbers or doing certain things, like repeat, repeat, repeat. So that exposure it matters a great deal. So I do think that we need more of that. Again, there's so much out in the world that we kind of get saturated. But I feel like we have to couple that exposure with ways to provide the why behind it. And one of the things that I think is a good strategy around this, and I talked about this at our last iMason session, Nabil, and that was, we need to start also talking about the consequences for not moving forward, for not continuing to change and grow. There are consequences, huge consequences for every industry sector and even for national security. But I'm just saying, like, people have to understand that we need to do it responsibly. We need to learn how to change industry. We need to grow in a way that is thoughtful. It's hard because it's so fast, and the slowest we're going to go is today, which we know, right? So it's hard, but there are consequences that are pretty grave for not continuing. And I think that's the part that is little known.
Yeah. And plus we also need to be open-minded as well. All right. They said third time is a charm. You've already done it twice. Not that we want you to leave the sector. We still need a lot of leadership. Is that something on the radar anytime soon?
Yeah, there is. I am, kind of on the downhill side here. And I do want, even though I know my brain needs to stay plugged in and active. So my future is to continue to do what I'm doing with Compass for as long as Chris will probably have me, but also to bring in some successor type plan so that I can, again, kind of exit in a way where I can stay involved and sitting on boards and participating in the industry and perhaps speaking at different venues, but have the flexibility that I need to have, but just really more or less to open up other opportunities, not only for someone else to come in and continue, who probably will do far better things than I could do, but also to continue learning myself, to continue growing. So yeah, that's on the radar, probably in the not too distant future.
Brilliant. What would you tell your younger self if you were to do it all over again?
Oh, I would definitely say not to take myself so seriously. And 100%, I would say, don't cross bridges until you get to them. And probably the third thing, which is really just some of the best advice I've ever been given, was don't let your facts get in the way of your message.
Brilliant.
Love it. Love it. I just keep sounding, for some reason, the thought that popped into my head, I'm in Montclair, right? Montclair is Yogi Berra town, because this is where Yogi Berra lived. And the Yogi Berra expression, when you come to a fork in the road, take it, is I live my life by. And the reason for it, I'll give you one little tidbit. The reason for it is because if you go to where Yogi Berra's house was, like it's called Yogi Berra Way now, there is a right and a left, and both directions go to his house.
Oh my God.
You literally like if you took a fork in the road, you'd still get to Yogi Berra's house.
Right.
I guess that's the starting point, Phil, for this carol that we are making. Nancy, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. This has been amazing. Lovely to get to know you more, and I'd love to actually host you again one of these days.
Well, I had a really good time. You guys are naturals because it's really easy to talk with you, and it's very thought-provoking, and I'm sure there's plenty of other things we can cover. So,
Indeed.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Nancy.
thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.
This has been great. Nothing lasts forever. Markets will come back, currencies will rebound, businesses will go on, and we will all move on. That could happen next week, next month, or next year. At Nomad Futurist, we're confident that those who prepare rather than panic will come out of this stronger. Thank you for joining us. This has been brought to you by Nomad Futurist. Check us online at nomadfuturist.org And thank you for listening and subscribing, as well as your continued support.